If you can hold most of the questions, the general questions, to the end when the full complement of people are here, that'd be great. But if you have a clarifying question in the midst of the presentation, please stop us and ask it. So thank you to Courtney again for joining us. So Courtney is the Director of Innovation Projects at the Greater Cleveland Partnership, where she works to connect funding opportunities and agency programs with the goals of GCP organizations to support their sustainability planning and initiatives. Prior to that, she worked at New Localism Associates, helping cities and metropolitan areas design, finance, and deliver transformative initiatives that promote inclusive and sustainable growth. Before NLA, Courtney worked at Accenture, consulting for the federal agency and independent nonprofit clients, focusing on business strategy and design, as well as project management. She graduated with high honors from Georgetown University with a degree in economics. And with that, we welcome Courtney. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all today. Thanks for coming in. And thanks, Trisha, for the introduction. I think the most important thing to know about me is I'm a policy nerd, and my goal is to help connect policies and agency programs to Greater Cleveland area organization priorities. So I read Brookings on a Saturday. I love this kind of stuff, and I love trying to make things work so that Cleveland area organizations can take advantage of it. I always say that if society is a garden, policy is the soil. You can have a hostile environment to growth. You can have one that supports it. And a lot of the stuff that we're seeing out of the federal government right now is supporting growth in a lot of different areas, but primarily sustainability, manufacturing, energy efficiency, a lot of topics that hopefully appeal to all of you today. And as mentioned, if you've got any clarifying questions, we'll go through. I know that there's a wide variety of folks on the call today, some people from nonprofit organizations, some from city government, some from the private sector. And so I'm going to try and talk through things that affect all of you. But if I don't touch on something, please ask about it, and I'm happy to talk.
Courtney.
Yep.
I just want to let you know that we have copies of the slideshow. We're going to hand them out now, so that you can follow along and make notes.
Okay, so primarily today we're going to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, just because that's where a ton of the manufacturing and energy efficiency incentives are coming through. However, there's been a ton of government spending also through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the CHIPS and Science Act. And some provisions from those acts might be applicable to you all as well. But today, since we are focusing on energy efficiency, we're primarily going to be talking about the IRA. And when I talk about government funding, one of the things that I like to do is to discuss truly how transformative and how large the amount of money this is. We've had a really productive legislative session in the 117th Congress. And because of that, I think people got numb to the funding that was coming through the pike. And so just to give you a demonstration of what that amount actually looks like, 1 million seconds is 11 days, 1 billion seconds is 32 years, and the Inflation Reduction Act alone is $370 billion. And that's just one of the laws that came through. So it's New Deal amounts of funding, but it goes to private, public, nonprofit organizations, unlike the New Deal, which was primarily for public entities. So what does the Inflation Reduction Act do? Its goal is to provide the supports through tax credits, loans, grants, and other programs that will reduce U.S. carbon emissions by 40% by 2030. It's the most ambitious bill we have for the climate crisis yet, and it primarily looks to do this through domestic energy production, energy efficiency, manufacturing, transportation, and climate-ready ag. Most of the programs that you all might be interested in will run through the Department of Energy, but a lot of programs will also come through USDA, HUD, Department of Interior, Department of Transportation, Commerce, and the Environmental Protection Agency. So depending on which initiatives you're interested in, will depend on which government agencies you should pay attention to. So at its simplest interpretation, IRA looks to do three things. It wants to make a cleaner, cheaper, and more secure energy grid through putting renewable energy online, whether that's wind, geothermal, solar, and then also batteries to store because of intermittent availability. It wants to have built environments that are ready to take full advantage, which at its like most pithy, you could call it electrifying everything. And so whether that's cars, whether that's buildings, decreasing the amount of energy it takes to run these things as well, which is why energy efficiency is such a big deal. And then the third is community benefits and environmental justice. And so some of these things are things that you would expect, like tree planting and recovering urban forestry. Others you might not expect, like plugging orphan methane wells. I'm not sure if folks know, but last year in Cam's Corner, there was an orphan methane well right by a retirement home that was spewing methane, causing health effects, not to mention it smelled terrible. And so funds like this can be used to address issues like that. And so with this funding, I like to group it into two buckets. So there's guaranteed incentives and then there's competitive funding opportunities. And depending like where your organization's appetite is for taking on different types of funding will depend which of these buckets you're interested in. So guaranteed incentives, the way that I like to talk about them is they're guaranteed if you hit the requirements and like you submit the forms that you need to the IRS. It's kind of the same as if you're getting a tax deduction, like for charitable contributions, you bought some or you donated to an organization that hit certain requirements, and then you get to take that deduction on your tax bill. You don't have to beat other people out by donating more money, or there's not like a certain cap of how many people in the United States could take advantage of that deduction. That's how guaranteed incentives work. Then on the other side are competitive funding opportunities. So you don't just have to meet the requirements in order to get this money, you have to beat out other people and other organizations to get this money. And so a lot of the things that are on the competitive side have to do with research and development and manufacturing, and then environmental justice as well. And so you apply for this at the agency level. It's a competitive process. It's a more sophisticated application. You might have to get a grant writer for it. And even if you put together an amazing application, you still might not get the grant. I've served on a few of these grant review committees, and the way that they break them down, depending on the agency, you can have an excellent, a very good, a good, and then you can have a fair/poor and a not competitive. In many cases, if you hit all the requirements and you get goods from everybody, your application can just be triaged because there are so many people who are in the excellent and in the very good category that it's not even worth looking at the goods. So because of that, depending on how much experience you have navigating the federal landscape and what kind of projects you have, sometimes I like to tell folks to start with the guaranteed incentives and focus on that instead, because it's a lower lift for the most part. If you get the right contractors and you fill out the right forms, you can get that guaranteed incentive. So, but that said, like some of these competitive funding opportunities, the projects can range from 5 million to 50 million to 150 million. So they are really big, significant opportunities if they make sense for your organization. It just depends on your appetite and your abilities. And then in terms of the breakdown of these, so in the Inflation Reduction Act, about 66% of the dollars are for tax credits. It's about 21% for grants, 10% for loans, and then some other financial instruments for the last bit, just so you have an understanding of how it breaks down. So for guaranteed incentives, as I mentioned, a lot of these are tax credits. If you represent an organization that is tax exempt, you can still qualify for the tax credit. You just get it through something called direct pay instead. The easiest way to think about this is you go to Costco, you buy a new like washing machine, and then you get a rebate on that washing machine back to you. It's just a direct pay of dollars back to you. And the way that it works in most cases is as a rebate. There's one special case for energy efficiency incentives. So if, I don't know, again, I'm not entirely sure who is in the room today, but if you're a contractor that is working with a nonprofit that wants to increase their energy efficiency, the way that it would work for the nonprofit you're working with you would have to pass through that deduction to them in terms of like decreased cost instead of them getting it directly. But that's the only case in which that happens. For most of the other tax credits, it's just a direct pay for them. And again, if anyone has clarifying questions as we go through, let me know, because I know it's kind of wonky, because direct pay is a new provision. So for clean energy tax incentives, the two biggest ones that you will want to know about are the investment tax credit and the production tax credit. And the investment tax credit can give you a credit on up to 70% of the cost of the clean energy system that you implement. So if you are putting in solar on your manufacturing facility, depending on where your facility is located, and if you're working with a scrupulous contractor that pays like quote unquote prevailing wages, you can get up to 70% of the cost of that back to you. It's really lucrative. It's like getting a 70% discount on a solar system or a wind farm. So it can. So sorry, for everyone who is online, the question was if prevailing wages mean union. And I don't think it necessarily has to mean union, but it does, it's certain Department of Labor standards. They have it well defined there. And it's both prevailing wages and a certain amount of apprenticeship labor has to be used in order to qualify. So if you don't use prevailing wage labor, or you don't meet the apprenticeship requirements, the investment tax credit is only 6%. If you meet those labor requirements, then it goes up to 30%. If you're located in certain areas like an energy community, which the east side of Cleveland, a ton of the east side of Cleveland counts as an energy community, you can get an extra 10%. If you're in a low income community, you can get an extra 10%. If the solar panels are produced with domestic content, so they were created in the United States and produced with materials from the United States, that's an extra 10%. So again, you can get up to 70% depending on how many of these requirements you're hitting. Depending on how large your project is, you actually might be able to get more money back if you take the production tax credit instead. So if you are looking at kind of like a utility scale, or it doesn't even have to be utility scale, but there is a certain like economic threshold, and where the size of your project, it just makes more sense for you to take the production tax credit instead. And the way that that works is based on like the number of kilowatt hours that you're producing. So if it's a small project, ITC is often better for you. If it's a large project, the PTC could be more lucrative. There's also a ton of electric vehicle tax credits. So I think a lot of folks are probably familiar with this on the consumer side, but you might not know that you can also get tax credits for your commercial fleet. So if you would like to use it for a commercial vehicle, you can. It depends on which kind of commercial vehicle you're using it for. If it's a lightweight vehicle, you're capped at $7,500 per vehicle, and there's no limit on the number of vehicles. So if you're buying 2 vehicles, you can get this. If you're buying 50 vehicles, you can get this. If you're over 14,000 pounds, it's capped at $40,000 per vehicle. And this one, it's a tax credit of up to 30% of the cost. And then if you're getting an electric vehicle, if you're getting a hybrid, then it's up to 15% of the cost. And there's a certain, there's a list of all the vehicles that hit these requirements, because again, sometimes there's domestic content production, or it has to be built on, a certain amount of it has to be built on American shores. The IRS just released guidance on this. And in this deck, there's a link to the IRS provisions. But just so everyone's aware, I know a lot of folks who run like contractor-based businesses and have folks that have to have their own vehicles. A lot of them are looking into this, especially because electric vehicles often have like lower maintenance costs over their time frame. So it can be interesting. Then there's a refueling infrastructure tax credit. So you need to charge the vehicle somehow. You can get up to $100,000 or 30% of the alternative like fueling cost per charger, whichever one is less. I know a lot of the headquarters that GCP has worked with, they have put this in some of their headquarters as a benefit to their employees, like you can charge your electric vehicle while you're at work. I've also seen folks be interested in this as something that they can actually monetize instead. And so if you, I don't know, if you're, let's say you own like a shopping area and you want to put in some alternative fueling infrastructure and then charge folks to use it, this could be something that helps defray the cost enough to make it so that your break even point is lower. And you don't even have to just use it for four-wheeled electric vehicles. You can also put in a charger for a 2 or 3-wheel electric vehicle, like an electric bike. I haven't seen this in practice yet. And I'm sure it's a much lower cost than what the cost of a charger would be for a 4-wheel vehicle. But it's available to apply to that too. And then I've tried to note the sections, like the tax sections in this sheet, as well as the forms that you would have to fill out in order to apply for these grants, or sorry, these tax credits. But you should talk with your tax attorney. Obviously, this isn't pure tax advice from me. I'm not a CPA. And so let's see. Go to the next one. And then finally, for energy efficiency tax incentives, if you have a commercial building, you might have already been familiar with the Section 179D tax credit, but this previously existing deduction has now been made permanent, and it primarily applies to commercial building owners. But if you are a developer or you have a real estate investment trust, you can also use this. And then, as I mentioned before, if you are a nonprofit or you're a public entity, you can access this tax credit as well. Just instead of direct pay, whatever the credit would be, it would have to pass through your contractor and they would have to give that cost to you. You would just have to write your contract in a certain way so that you would recoup that cost. And if you wanted to, you could even do interesting incentive structures like, okay, you help us qualify for X amount on this tax credit, and because of that, you get to keep 10% of what you saved us. You could do an interesting structure like that. Qualifying improvements for this energy efficiency tax credit includes the building envelope. So it's insulation and retrofitting. It includes lighting. So if you have a commercial building and you want to upgrade everything to LED, that counts. Also for HVAC and hot water. These are all qualifying updates that you can make to your property that would qualify under 179D. And from my understanding of 179D, you don't have to tackle all of these things at once. You can get like a sliding scale or a partial tax credit if you're only taking on one of these projects. So if you're only doing LED, then you get a smaller tax credit back. But you can do that. If you're doing a whole building, that's great. Then you have to achieve at least 25% annual energy savings in order to qualify for like this, whole building deduction. And the least, if you qualify for 25% energy savings, then you can get $2.50 per square feet. If you want the full deduction, which is 50% annual energy savings, you get $5 per square foot. Yes, sorry.
So the question is, and I heard you say deduction a few times, so is this on your business taxes? And this is not a tax credit that would be syndicated like other development tax credits are?
Yeah, I think it's, okay, sorry, for those on the line, they asked if this would be a business tax credit or a syndicated one. And I believe it's just like I believe it's a traditional business tax credit. Sorry, go ahead.
What he asked, but has there generally been an effort to monetize deduction as well?
So oh, sorry, and sorry for those online. I keep on just jumping into answering these questions. That someone asked if there's been efforts to monetize this tax deduction. I did see in the past few months, one startup come online to do this. And they got a lot of press for it, but I haven't really seen it, or if people are doing it, they're just not being public about it. And then one thing that I should have mentioned again earlier is when you're doing these projects, again, because they are credits, you have to put in the money up front. The government is not going to give you the down payment to do this. Once you're project is placed into service and meets the requirements, that's when you get the deduction. But there are ways to make sure that you meet the requirements. Again, you work with your contractors. For this one, this energy efficiency tax credit, the Department of Energy has some approved energy efficiency like modeling software where they will anticipate what the different savings you get from different projects will be. Sorry, yes.
One last question. So you have to fund the money, and then is there a recognized bridge loan that you could get? Is working on that? I know that capital is that a green bank that they're trying to stand up. There's some type of bridge capital to get you from A to B while you're doing the energy incentives, so you can realize it from your soul.
Yeah, that's my dream. I would love to see it. Oh, sorry, to repeat everyone down the line. I'm so sorry, everyone. I just jump right into answering these. There was a question on whether there's bridge financing since there aren't upfront dollars on pursuing these projects. So the green bank, I'm waiting to see exactly what they're planning to fund because a lot of that money has to come from the federal government, and the green bank, the amount of money from the federal government for green banks is kind of divided into 3 buckets. And 2 of those buckets are for more like lower income projects or projects that couldn't get financing otherwise. And then 1/3 can kind of be used for other projects. And so I'm not quite sure how Greater Cleveland's green bank is going to function. I don't know if it's primarily going to focus on lower income properties or places that couldn't get financing versus these large commercial entities. But I'd really like to see it. And I mean, I know there's plenty of folks that just do financing for general updates, and you could just pursue a traditional way. I don't know if eventually we'll see loan products for green updates that are lower interest rate. I don't know. I would hope, but yeah. Sorry, was that another question? Oh, I think that was. Yes. Okay. Thanks.
Sorry.
Oh, no. All right. We can keep going. And then, so those were some of the commercial ones. I mean, we're at the Aerospace Institute, but I didn't necessarily see any, I didn't see any airline folks on the registration list, but one thing that's not listed here, but that does exist is they created a sustainable aviation fuels tax credit. It's $1.25 now, and you have to show 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions through the use of that sustainable aviation fuel. I think it'll primarily benefit places like United Airlines that are using the majority of the sustainable aviation fuel in the United States today. And there's also a sustainable aviation fuel grand challenge. It's kind of like a moonshot to increase the amount of SAF that the United States produces from 300 million gallons today to 3 billion gallons by 2030. It's still a huge deficit. We will need 450 billion gallons by 2050 to make aviation net zero, but it's a step. So if anyone is interested in SAF, I can send you more resources online or after, but it didn't seem like anyone was an airline folk today. So then transitioning to consumer tax incentives, just because sometimes companies might not be able to tackle some of the energy efficiency upgrades or be able to afford a solar panel system today, but you might be able to support your employees as they pursue some of this. So these are income dependent upfront discounts and tax credits. So if you're, depending on whether you're a low, moderate, or high income household, depends on whether you get an upfront discount or you get a tax credit later on. But you can get up to like $14,000 in tax credits or upfront discounts through this program. For low and moderate income households, we're still waiting on guidance from the IRS on how the upfront discounts are going to work. But if you are a higher income household, we do have guidance on tax credits. So for example, right now I'm looking at insulating my own home to decrease the energy that I'm losing, and as an energy efficiency upgrade. I could get up to 30% of that back in tax credits. So that's one thing that I'm pursuing. I'm also potentially pursuing solar on my roof. I have to get a new roof first, which I'm doing later this week. But I could also get up to 30% off the solar consumer tax credit. We are off the cost of a solar system because of that. And so there's a lot of things that qualify for this. You could get, if you want a heat pump instead of your traditional HVAC system, if you want like in-home battery storage, you want to get a heat pump water heater, that's probably the next thing I'm looking at. You can get up to 30% back on the cost of these things. And it might make something that was a little bit out of reach before in reach. So, and then, yeah, as I mentioned, the solar tax credit, the 30% tax credit applies here too. And it's for primary or secondary residences. So I know a lot of folks who are pursuing this for their rental properties or if they have Airbnbs. Yes.
I have to measure like the metrics of how much the solar is saving to get the rebate.
So someone asked if you have to know how much like solar production your project will have in order to get the rebate, and the answer is no. So this is completely anecdotal, but when I was getting my roof looked at for solar, I have a very small house and small roof footprint, but for 6 panels I was looking at, I would they would pay for themselves based on the decreased cost of my electric use in 6 years. And so I don't necessarily know like what the savings, I don't know what the savings would be. I just know that I break even at a certain point. So, and that doesn't matter. You get the 30% just by installing them. Again, if you meet like prevailing wage labor for this, which a lot of the solar companies are really motivated to hit right now, because they get to pass that discount on to their consumers, and folks who wouldn't have considered it otherwise are now considering it. Yep. Okay. And as again, we've already talked about electric vehicle tax credits. There is a list of certain vehicles that qualify that are listed on the IRS website. If you're interested in an electric vehicle, and if you have an electric vehicle, you're probably going to want somewhere to charge it. And you can get a credit of up to $1,000 for an in-home charging system. And I do know some companies are trying to figure out for, again, if they have fleet of folks who like they've got salespeople who are going to different people's homes or have to travel, if there are ways that they can help support people getting charging infrastructure in their own home through like ChargePoint or another analogous EV charging provider, and then being able to take the tax credit to take the cost down. Yes.
There's a question in the chat. Is it just the installation cost that gets the 30% credit, or also the cost of the solar panels?
Yeah, it's both. It's both the cost of the solar panels and the installation cost. Okay. And so, as mentioned, this is the full list of the existing tax credits and deductions. Some things will continue to get updates or come online. Again, the IRS's website is either your or your tax attorney or your CPA's best friend in this process. I check it more than I ever anticipated. There are also additional Ohio level tax credits, but some of those have to be applied for. It's not necessarily a guaranteed thing. So I have a list of Ohio-based renewable and clean energy tax credits, and they have to do more with like property taxes. But if anyone's interested in that, happy to send along those resources as well. And so this is all tax credits. We can talk slightly about competitive opportunities. Oh, yes.
What you mentioned, energy efficiency modeling services being available for commercial projects. Are they available for residential if necessary? And can she repeat where these services are available? I don't know if they heard my question. So
Okay, yeah. So the question was about residential energy efficiency modeling. And so a lot of engineering firms will be able to do this. And then depending on like which efficiency upgrades you want, like some things you would want to do like a blower door test for figuring out like how much your house is leaking air. But some things like LED lighting, like you don't necessarily need to model that for your house. And it's not necessary to qualify for the tax credit. So I guess it would be just more for your own interest than it would be for any like financial benefit.
A lot of our companies provide like energy on
Yeah, that's true. So someone just made the great point about how a lot of energy companies provide in-home energy audits. And that's actually something that qualifies for a tax credit too. I think it's only like $150, but it's $150 you wouldn't have to spend on your residential home energy audit. So it's a great point. Okay. And so as I mentioned, for competitive opportunities, so these can really range in size. They can be anything from like $1 million to $150 million, depending on the project. And they're for all different sectors. They're for manufacturing, they're for aviation, they're for biofuels, they're for agriculture, they're for if you want like near net shape manufacturing is a big one that's occurring right now. And so I'm just going to show two representative ones on the next slide, but there's the competitive opportunities. They're coming fast and furious when something's dropped. And by dropped, I mean the government has posted an opportunity online. You usually have anywhere between 60 and 180 days to apply for it. Some of these opportunities will come around like multiple times because the grant is funded for the next like 5 years, but some of them are one-time dollars. And if you think that your small business wouldn't apply, you'd be surprised at how much you actually can qualify for. And you would also be surprised at how many projects you can apply for with a larger company, or that you could apply for with a university or another organization that would be able to kind of support some of the heavier lift pieces like the reporting requirements and the actual grant writing. There's a lot of these grants are targeted at small companies or places that want to prove out and demonstrate the feasibility of new technologies that can then have like national scalability. So just an example, the Industrial Decarbonization and Emissions Reduction Demonstration Grant. I know these are really long titles. This one it's got 2 tracks, but the first track is anywhere between $10 and $250 million per award. This just recently closed, so it's not available to apply for now, but I do anticipate we'll see another round of this funding. So it's good to see kind of like what's getting funded now and then say, oh, does this fit me? Could I fit it? And then pursue it next time it comes around. But for this is trying to decarbonize like really high emitting sectors. So places that Cleveland has a ton of strength in, whether it's steel, cement, plastics, chemicals. And it's trying to figure out, if you can do industrial electrification, if you can do low carbon fuels, anything that's hard to abate would qualify for this demonstration project. And the whole purpose of it is, again, to try it out in one small location and then see what can be scaled up to manufacturers around the country. I think Cleveland is so well suited for these types of grants, given what our strengths are in, and the way that we're such a manufacturing powerhouse and might be able to be a lighthouse for other regions as they're trying to grapple with these same challenges. And then, as mentioned before, alternative fuels for aviation, through this in because we're at the Aerospace Institute today. There is $47 million for projects relating to low emission aviation technologies. And everything that we're discussing today is on top of what agencies are already spending. Like a lot of these agencies have huge budgets today. Sometimes they're billions of dollars, and they're funding national labs that are working on battery technologies or on aviation technologies. They're partnering together, like the Federal Aviation Administration and the Department of Transportation are partnering together on these aviation grand challenges. And so what we're discussing today is on top of programs that will continue regardless of like whether legislation is enacted. So in times of fewer bills being passed, there's still dollars that are going towards these kinds of projects. And there's a ton for workforce as well. Building back industrial workforce is a huge priority of the current administration. And so there's a lot of Department of Labor and Department of Education grants that are going towards this in addition. And if you want to explore this more, GCP has stood up a federal funding hub where our whole purpose, and so in the back are Michaela and Caroline today, who are two of the women that I work with on this. And it's truly about helping organizations determine whether they are a good fit and what resources they would need to pursue some of these grants. So if you have further interest, please talk to us about it. finally. So how can my organization position itself to fully leverage some of these dollars? It depends on who your organization is and what your goals are. So this is really general advice, but I would say, again, don't underestimate the power of a guaranteed incentive. It's such a lower lift to qualify for these guaranteed incentives and pursue them than it is the competitive opportunities. And they're truly, it's a transformational amount of money. You're going to have to involve your finance team, your operations, your legal, your facilities, depending on the type of project you want to pursue early and often. You're going to have to get buy-in. I call them your Avengers team. And then you need to try and link these incentives to your organization's upcoming plans and operations. Are there additional opportunities that could push you over a threshold that you hadn't considered? Like if you want to do these energy efficiency upgrades to your building, and you're like, okay, I was just going to do LED, but now I actually want to do insulation. Could that, instead of having like the pieces and part tax credit, actually get you to the 25% demonstrated reduction and put you in a higher bracket for tax credits? You have to take complexity as an opportunity in this case. And then if you want to pursue competitive funding, are you able to partner with other organizations and leverage some of their capabilities? Like CSU and CASE both have big manufacturing operations and centers that are pursuing some of these dollars. And they have entire shops within them that are just their whole purpose is to help get non-dilutive funding like grants to entities. So can you partner with them, leverage some of the capabilities that are already in place instead of developing them on your own? And then I'd also pay attention to regulations from the IRS if you want tax credits, or again, have your CPA or your tax attorney do so. And then grants from relevant agencies if you are interested in doing the competitive route. Department of Energy is going to be the #1 thing I think anybody in this room would care about. And then finally, again, maybe your organization can't take on any of this right now, but you could support your employees and coworkers as they try to pursue some of these energy efficiency incentives, whether it's through webinars, education sessions, etc. So happy to answer any other questions. Yes.
So my question starts with, you demonstrated how much money this is. What's amount of time that's supposed to be used in?
Yes.
Another follow-up.
Okay, so the question was, how long will these incentives be available? So the tax credits, depending on the tax credit, they're either available through 2031 to 2033, depending on the tax credit. That's the nice thing about this, is it gives some market certainty. There is talk right now because of the debt ceiling of trying to strike where Republicans would like to strike a deal to take back some of these tax credits. But I would be surprised if that's something that Democrats are willing to concede on, especially just given the amount of investment is going into states because of it. So we'll see. I would be surprised. As it stands today, these things will be in place between 2031 and 2033.
And you talked a lot about agencies,
Mhm.
Department of Energy. There's others I know. And so is your portal, your funding hub, going to be keeping track of all those agencies and when they
Yes.
are putting stuff out?
Yep. So the question was if anyone at GCP is tracking what agencies are putting out and the funding available. Yes, we are. And we're trying to be proactive and reaching out to folks that we think would be interested in some of the competitive opportunities, but we know there's folks that we're missing. So again, if you want to be on lists or be informed about this, reach out. Mhm. Oh, sorry. Behind you, Shatter's up. Yeah. Mhm.
I know some of this funding is closed now, but do you have any examples of how you guys helped and how cumbersome the process was, or any that utilize somebody's higher,
Yeah, so the question was if we've had any feedback or learnings from working with companies about how cumbersome some of these grants are. And so we're pursuing applications right now with companies. So Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law in September. In between that and the end of 2022, a lot of the agencies were figuring out how they were going to implement the programs, because when Congress puts something into law, it's a big bucket of money. They say, we want you to do something with it. They like tell you the top line, and then it's up to the agencies to figure out all the program details, the eligibility requirements, all the award amounts, all of that. And so through the end of the year, a lot of that was going on at the agency level. And so we started going full swing at this and working with companies in January and February. And so a lot of those grant deadlines we're working towards right now. And we're seeing like, there's some stuff that we've won that isn't public yet. And then there's some stuff that we'll be waiting on. And then there's plenty that need to be applied for. I will say, yes, the agencies I'd say the reporting requirements in particular can be pretty cumbersome, but that's the advantage of working with a grant writer or like a grant manager, as well as a larger institution like a university when possible, is somebody someone who's really well heeled in figuring out how to manage this. Yes, sorry.
So we want to pursue installing solar systems on small commercial buildings.
Mhm.
And amount of money involved is a make or break factor from 6% to 7%.
Yeah.
If you don't get the 50, you're gonna basically go broken. Two questions. One, just yesterday, I wrote someone in China, they're selling what they call a generator, which is solar, a battery, and an inverter. And she wrote me back saying the tariff is $275. Yeah, 275%. And I thought that Biden had actually put that on hold. So can you give some clarification as to the tariff we bring from China?
So the question was about tariffs for Chinese solar products. And so off the top of my head, I don't know. I do know that a lot of these tax credits have like Buy American requirements attached to them, like the domestic content, like plus 10% one that's a Buy American provision. But I don't think that applies for everything. Like you should still be able to get the 6% base and the 30% prevailing labor. You wouldn't be able to qualify for all of them, I don't think. And then I think tariffs are tariffs. Like I think that's just kind of separate.
What's it?
So call them to ask if there's ways to bypass the tariff, or okay.
Writing me back, I think for information or my.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm trying to think which agency would be best for that. I'm sure you could ask DOE, but there's probably somebody better to ask. I'll think on that. I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah, okay. And then are there any questions online that I'm missing? Okay.
Question is, any chance GCP will have a webinar that focuses on residential incentives that companies can schedule for their employees?
Oh yeah, sorry. So the question is that GCP will have a webinar on residential pieces. We don't have anything scheduled right now. It's good to know that there's interest. I will say a lot of times I personally talk with companies about webinars for their employees. And so if that's something that you're interested in, I can make like an hour of my time available for it, but we don't have like anything planned currently.
Are there any particular initiatives that are prioritized for like the Ohio specific grants over the national for the Inflation Reduction Act? It's like strategically, you know.
Yeah, so all right, so the question was about if there's priorities at the Ohio level versus the federal level. first I'll say that participating in a state level incentive doesn't preclude you from a federal incentive. So there are other states like, I know this in Massachusetts or in New York, if you're installing a solar system or you're getting a heat pump, you can stack the state incentive with the federal incentive. In Ohio, our incentives are primarily for either manufacturers or are like tax deductions for installing clean energy. And so it's not like a prioritization so much as what applies to your project and how do you stack it to get the most bang for your buck. Mhm. Yes.
So it seems like installing solar panels is a new job. We need, is there been any analysis, like in Cuyahoga County or Northeast Ohio, how many businesses there are that can do this work? And are they, are new companies standing themselves up to take advantage of it?
So, all right. So the question was if there's been any Cuyahoga County analysis of solar companies and their workforce needs and the amount of folks they have trained today. I don't know about a specific county assessment. There's been a lot of national assessments, and I can just tell you if you know anybody who doesn't want to go to college and wants a lucrative
Yeah.
career, tell them to be an electrician. We are going to need 1 million more electricians is the amount anticipated. There are workforce, again, Department of Labor is putting a lot of dollars into like workforce training, and they just put out a question. They put out these things called requests for information, and it's important to answer them if you have the ability and capability to. I know it's not part of everyone's day-to-day work, besides my own, but if you can say these are our big challenges, this is what we don't have, and then it helps inform the grant money that they put out there. And so recently they put out a request for information specifically for solar workforce. And so I know there's been national assessments. I don't know about county specific ones. Oh yeah, go ahead.
So you've talked a lot about solar panels. Is anyone talking about wind anymore?
So, all right, the question is, we've talked a lot about solar panels, but who's talking about wind? A lot of people are talking about wind. It just, a lot of those places are places like Rhode Island and Massachusetts and New York. You have to produce like wind turbine components close to where they get installed. And so if anyone's willing to pursue like offshore Lake Erie wind, that could be lucrative for manufacturers here, and it could be an opportunity for us, but there have been policy challenges with that in recent years. So, and then wind, again, it's extremely lucrative in places like South Dakota and Iowa and California. I don't know how good Ohio is for it. And then geothermal is a whole new beast that's just being explored, but I'm really excited about, especially in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania that have had such natural gas or methane, had methane gas infrastructure for so long. We might be well positioned for geothermal. Sorry, I didn't mean to ignore you. Oh yeah.
So building off of wind is lead code like that. The Lake Erie wind project, is that now dead after a decade of talking about it?
I'll plead the fifth on this. I'm not gonna answer that one. Oh, sorry. The question was asking the status of lead co. So. Anything else?
Virtual audience, just asking for them.
Oh yeah, in the virtual audience, if there's anything that you all wanted to give you the opportunity to do so. I know we're coming up on the last 10 minutes. Oh, yep.
Can we reach out to you for advice, motivation, whatever? And hey, I got this stock, can I get past that point?
The question is if you can reach out about getting stuck on certain pieces or maybe needing advice. Yes, I'm happy to answer anything that I can. There's a certain point at which it'll probably be better for you to talk directly with the contractor or a certain engineering firm, but happy to happy to give thoughts. For example, like we did one of these presentations with the 2030 Buildings District. Some churches came back to us with questions about direct pay. Happy to answer anything that I can. So. Mhm.
When is the hub going to be up? Or is it now?
The GCP's funding hub is up. It's up and running. So, yeah.
Nothing but,
Oh, so there's not a funding hub specific website. There's just the Greater Cleveland Partnership website.
There's a question, will you be able to share this presentation? Is it okay if we send this out?
Oh, yep. We're happy to share the presentation with folks.
And type in your contact information in the chat, which I don't know your email off the top of my head.
Oh, sure. So it is Courtney.Kisbaugh, Kishb as in boy, AUGH @greatercle.com. And depending on your question, there's some folks who have better knowledge than me in certain topics, like whether it's workforce or infrastructure. And so I may pass you off to somebody else who is an expert in one of those. But that's all I have. So thanks, everyone.
Great. So in addition to you getting the recording and Courtney's presentation, hang on just a second. Gotta get this up. Hang on a minute, having a little technical difficulty here getting my slides up. You know what? There we go. All right. So I think we can all agree that these incentives for the interest in energy efficiency is going to be increased with these incentives, which is really, really exciting. And also that brings up the fact that there's a lot of opportunities for innovation in this area too. And Carol and I work in biomimicry, so we always look to biology to inform innovation and new ways of doing things. So I just want to talk really briefly about this very cool research that's going on at Stanford University. They're looking at a material which is really widespread on the earth. It's very low cost and it's called perovskite. And Stanford has found that it converts sunlight to electricity as efficiently as silicon, but it offers a great deal more versatility and it's a lot lower cost. So in looking at the eye of this moth, each individual bump you see there is an eye, and they started to think about the versatility that that would give solar collectors, because right now we're used to the lower left-hand side, really rigid, oriented in one way. But if we could have each solar collector be a small unit in a honeycomb, also based on nature, it could get wrapped around things, sides of buildings, tops of cars, and things like that. So we are really excited about the fact that the attention is coming on energy efficiency, because there's so much that we can learn from biology in looking at that. And we want to tell you about an upcoming event on June 14th. John Nottingham, co-president of Nottingham SPERC, and Brent Durich from EY are going to be presenting at a lunch and learn about innovation. And just to give you some stats about Nottingham SPERC, they're kind of a really important company in Cleveland that a little bit fly under the radar. But these are the products that have been developed at Nottingham SPERC over the years. And I would guess with a show of hands, most of you have a Swiffer in your house, or at least know what a spin brush is, which is really fun to have John here. He's a really engaging speaker. And that will be on June 14th, same format as this, both in person and hybrid. We will get the registration link out really soon and hope that you can join. And then we just want to remind you about Bioscene. That's our big international conference in October 18, 19th, and 20. You can contact either Carol or I with any information that you want on that. And the topic is going to be materials, which is a big, wide world, but it's going to be very interesting. We will have speakers both from industry and from researchers about what's going on with bio-inspired materials. And I think with that, we can wrap up unless anyone's got last question or comment. or anything. We really want to thank Courtney for doing this. It's a lot of information. It's great. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of churning thought about this. And yeah, so thank you, Courtney. Oh, thanks for coming.